Welcome to this edition of Rattling the Bars. I'm Mansa Musa, co-hosting with Eddie Conway. And before we get into the interview, let me update y'all on Eddie Conway's health and his recovery. Eddie is doing great. He's back to being the old Eddie that we know and love, and hopefully he'll be intimately released from the rehab place where he's undergoing medical rehabilitation. When we think about the prison industrial complex and mass incarceration, and we know that it's the new form of slavery, very rarely do we see the extent of the brutality and the viciousness of the policies that exist around keeping men and women incarcerated. Virginia, for example, in 2020, they passed a bill, a law that says that inmates could get their sentence reduced, the time that they're serving while incarcerated reduced by participating in program, and they could have their sentence reduced to almost 2 years off after completion of the program. And it affected the entire prison population in the Virginia Commonwealth. Recently, Governor Glenn Youngkin had, with the backing of Republicans and Democrats, amended this law that affected everybody in the prison system, amended it the 11th hour when men and women was expected to be released, and amended it cutting off their ability and opportunity to be released early. Here to talk about this is Miss Chari Baker. Chari Baker was captured on news when she confronted Youngkin about this arbitrary, capricious, and racist amendment. Chari, welcome to Rattling the Bars.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Chari, tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Basically, I started a prison reform group called Fighting for Reform. I have a passion for prison reform as a whole, not just one particular area. And just me being married to someone that's incarcerated, the more time I spent going in and out of different facilities, it just drew me into a world that I really didn't know existed the way that it did, to the magnitude in which it did. And so, with that fuel and inspiration, I was like, there's got to be something done. Is there anyone fighting for these men and women on different types of level and different types of policies? And so that's when I formed Fighting for Reform, just to get involved as a whole. I also have a soft spot for people that I met inside. I know some that are lifers, and for lack of a better term. And so when I originally started Fighting for Reform, I started a program for the lifers called On the Books. And I would sell these T-shirts, and whatever we made off of those T-shirts, we would divide it up and put money on their books. We just wanted people to know that you're greater than your worst mistake, and somebody on the outside cares whether we know or not. We want you to know that you're still human and somebody cares. And so that it ran for a good 2 years, but then when COVID hit, everybody's pockets were affected by that. So the program itself has slowed down. However, the passion for prison reform has been consistent as things develop further, as going forward, it's something new all the time.
Okay, let's talk about the current repressive policy that's taking place in Virginia in the form of allowing men and women to earn good conduct credits. And I was incarcerated, and I, as a result of diminution credits, well, that's what they call them in the state of Maryland. As a result of diminution credits, my period of incarceration was reduced by a number of years. Had I not had that opportunity, I would probably be getting out sometime in 25. But when did they make the prisoners aware? More importantly, if you can talk about, first of all, talk about what the policy is, and then tell us, when did you become aware, or when did they make people aware that they were not going to benefit from the 2020 law?
Well, I was there from the beginning where it was just a hearing, where you're allowed to go before the senators and the delegates and, voice your public opinion on the matter. So that's where I came in. I kind of started from there. Down in Richmond, was able to attend the bill hearing and speak in favor of it. And that was in 2020. It actually Yeah, no, actually, I think that was 2019. It actually, formally was introduced to the General Assembly, I believe, 2020, and it passed in 2021. And so it was to be effective this year, July 1st, which it did. However, the bill was written that those that have obtained good behavior while incarcerated, depending on what level you were, on the in their system, what level you're at, you could get more credits off your time. So the higher the level, the less credits, the lower the level, the more credits. And so it allowed anywhere from 30 days off your sentence per month. It was a system that they had set up.
Right, right,
And so it was initially written in favor for those who had good behavior and for those who either had violent or nonviolent charges. Um,
right.
but the catch to it was good behavior. And so lawmakers still found an issue with that because if I am incarcerated and I have good behavior,
Mhm.
before there was ever an incentive in place, am I not displaying rehabilitation?
Right,
And all of these men, and the bill was actually written to be retroactive back to 1995. And so
right,
when time began to be calculated, a lot of people were getting years off, 6 years off, 7 years off,
right.
accumulating a lot of time off because they have been incarcerated for a long time. However, they had good behavior.
That's right.
and
And therein lies, okay, therein lies the problem. How do they justify ignoring the good behavior? Because as I look back on it, that like you say, it was a criteria. So if I meet the criteria,
Mhm.
you're not doing me. I'm meeting the criteria based on what you say the policy is. The policy being that if I exhibit good behavior, then my levels drop based on my good
Yes.
behavior. How did they reconcile that this good behavior no longer became a prerequisite for uh, the reduction?
Well, then at that point, they began to chop the bill up with charges. Well, these are violent charges and these are nonviolent charges. So we're potentially letting out murderers and we're potentially letting out rapists and we're potentially letting out pedophiles. So that's how they start to pick it apart. And it was
Hmm.
like, well, let's remove a certain group of people from the bill. And then
Hmm.
it went from we're going to exclude a certain amount of charges. And then they just kept picking it apart.
Right.
This bill had been through the House and the Senate. Um, and so both sides approved of the bill, but now the governor wants to say that it was written incorrectly. Well, did they all not read it? Did it not go
Right.
through policy? Did it not go through the necessary steps to become a final approved bill? And so I even think that that term that it was written incorrectly is just an easy statement to make to a group of people who don't understand. If you really don't know the ins and outs of a bill becoming law, it's easy to say that statement and people go, "Oh, okay," without.
Right. So, all right. In terms of let's talk about the impact that it had on the men and women that was expected to be released because you were captured confronting Youngkin about this arbitrary racist and capricious act on the part of the Virginia government. And but let's talk about that. Talk about the impact that it had on the family members that were expected to come out.
It was a shock. It had such a huge impact, because you had people who were definitely prepared and ready for their loved ones to come home. You had certain family members who were elder, and they're waiting to see their son or their daughter free for the first time, since being incarcerated, of course. And, as a parent, their voices, "I just wanna be alive when you come home."
Hmm.
I dealt with a couple specifically where, the father was sick. and he just wanted to see his son before he passed away. And
Right.
thankfully, he's still here today in this moment because it just happened. The bill being halted for, well, I'm saying him being eligible for the bill just happened, ineligible for the bill. And so it was a disappointment to that family in particular because that was him and his father's thing. They wanted to see each other before he could potentially pass because he is sick. Outside of that, it sends a message that it doesn't matter if we participate and vote on a bill. If you could find a way to use budget to legislate law in Virginia,
Mm.
it sets precedents that this can happen with any bill, not just this one.
Right. And I
It
think that's the and I think that's therein lies the danger is that, like you say, now you can look at, oh, well, bills relegated to providing people budget equity and say, well, we don't want this money to go to this income or this class of people. We want the money to go to the more affluent class of people.
mhm,
Or as it come down to like women's uh, issues. Or we don't want the money to go. We legislate this particular act for equity and dealing with abuse, but then we turn around and say, well, then again, no, we're gonna water down the language. But talk about what do you think is was illegal, or do you think it's a legal redress? Because it stands to reason that if this was made law, and I'm not familiar with the process, Virginia's legislative process. But I know once something become law in Maryland, uh, unless the law been declared illegal by the court, the law takes effect.
yeah. I
I'm not
feel
sure. How do from your investigation, or have you looked into the legality of this act or the illegality of this act?
Um, in in all honesty, and in just my opinion, I feel, like it is it is because it was legislated through the budget, I feel like that it is a thin hairline of being illegal. I really feel like it's illegal. I'm saying that because in law, there's all types of loopholes. I'm not well knowledgeable when it comes to law, depending on certain things, but I do know that it was a backhanded thing to do, and it was something that it was basically, I'm gonna comb this out and figure out a way where I could make this look legal without making it look too illegal, if that makes
Hmm.
sense, you know?
Right, right.
And I think they prey on the innocence, I mean, the ignorance of us not knowing the law to that degree. So if you throw some fancy words in there, it sounds like it's great. It's a budget amendment, you know, but I just think it was a loophole that was used. And I do think it is illegal. I know that there are some organizations that are um, to working some things behind the scenes to where there are maybe lawsuits coming. We haven't got a lot of detail on that, mainly because I think they're really waiting to solidify or get an airtight argument before they start opening up and sharing with
Right.
the public, which makes sense. But I
Right.
definitely have heard from other advocates or organizations that are working on some things behind the scenes.
And how and and your husband in particular, but in general, how and you say you in this space in terms of like being involved in the what's going on within the prison industrial complex in Virginia in particular. How
Mhm.
are the people that's affected by it, your husband in particular? How are they responding? What's their morale like?
You know, for one, when it comes to prison reform and that lifestyle, the morale is already low. And so when you get something like this, it started out as hope and then it
Mhm.
actually became real, you can only imagine how harsh of a blow that was, that 10 days prior to this going into effect, it's no longer real to some anymore.
Mhm.
Um, and there's grave disappointment. It's a lot of people that have lost hope. We had feedback from some of the members in the group where their loved one was considering suicide, where they
Mhm.
really thought that they were going home. And one of the things that I always say is that, you know, you never you can't grasp or understand someone's mental capacity being in behind bars from day to day. And some of these men and women, they might not have another 365, you know, left
Right.
in them, you know, mentally. And so something like this, where I was receiving feedback like that, is just crushing. And then a lot of the wives, they were afraid to even call the facility because they didn't want their loved one to be placed in the hole because of suicide watch,
Right.
because the last thing you want to do is isolate them when they're already feeling like that.
That's right.
So they were just like, what do we do? What should we do? So a lot of people had various different reactions, but the main ones was grave disappointment, depression, suicide, and just saying, Virginia's never going to do anything. Virginia's never going to do anything for us. And like I said, this was the closest we've ever gotten, even with the bill passed in 2020. It was still like, oh my gosh, this really finally happened.
Right.
hmm
And okay. And how long have y'all been fighting for it to get this particular
Um,
bill passed?
since 2020, but they told the people that they needed 2 years to calculate everybody's time in the system. Um, which I don't DLC
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
I know they're
Yeah.
not. Yeah. So, but that was
Yeah.
what they that is what they
Yeah. Pretty
said. I'm
much.
I'm I'm almost interested to see how
Were they
accurate
like?
that
Were they
is.
one,
Yeah,
two, three? Oh wait a minute. Hold up. One.
right.
Yeah. Right. Because I read in the article was that with the support that they was able to get this amendment done with the support of the Democrats, and it was passed under a Democratic uh, majority and governorship. It was passed under a Democrat majority with the governors. That's how it was initially passed. But
Mhm.
Youngkin come in, and I think you might be correct in that he brought in, with him came a tidal wave
Yes.
of Republican senators and delegates, right? Let's talk about what's y'all next step? What are your organization looking at doing in
Well,
terms of organizing around educating people about it and possibly trying to get it changed?
yes. Well, pretty much, I was asked to speak at a rally on Saturday. And the main purpose of that was really to encourage people to vote and become active in this. You can't just sit by and wait for somebody else to do it. And so we were encouraging them to become familiar with who is running for what office, no matter what it is. You have to know where they stand on prison reform. It's important. One of the main reasons why I had that encounter with the governor was because, in my support group, we go live at 9 p.m. on Thursdays, talking to everybody. We have certain topics or something. And I brought it up. I said, if there's a delegate or a senator in your area, go there. No matter if you know them or not, show up because they work for us, and
Right, right.
seize that opportunity to ask them, what it is that you want to ask them, because if essentially you're going to vote for them or you're not going to vote for them. So challenge them. Find that opportunity. It's all about timing, and it just so happened that the governor was going to be in my area, and I was like, "Oh, I got to do this." But so we try to encourage people to vote, to become active, do whatever you can, network, ask questions to try to understand this a bit more. I'm really big on passing accurate information as much as possible when it comes to stuff like this, because I never want to give off false hope, to anybody
Right.
on the inside. And so a lot of stuff in which I do say in my lives or whatever, I make sure that it is accurate because they're going to repeat it. They're going to pass it back to their loved one. Um, and outside of that, we're also doing another route. We're doing a protest actually on the 24th of July. And that protest is going to be geared to the outrage of this earned sentence credit. I feel like even though what has happened has taken place, I'm not going to stop talking about it. See, they're waiting for it to die down. That's how everything happens. But we're not going to let it die down. My biggest thing is it's really getting the people out. It's really getting the participation, because when you take a blow like this, it knocks out half of the people that go,
Hmm.
"What's the point of me showing up?"
Right.
So
And the shit, but the reality is that, like you say, they dehumanize us, they uh they marginalize us, and they define us as being less than human, and which give the public the sensitivity to say, oh well, or become insensitive to what's
yeah,
going on with us. I think that right now, uh, as you mentioned, the most important thing that can be done is that people, family members of the prisoners, become more
mhm,
involved. And what kind of response are you getting from the family members? Because they say over 8,000 people was affected. And
yes,
that was only that in its current way that would have been coming out if the the Department of Correction or Division of Correction would have got a better calculator, it probably would have
Mhm.
been more. So we don't know what they're using to add, but the reality is that it's an astronomical number that's of inmates or excuse me, of prisoners that are affected by men and women. What's the response from the family members, or do you have any gauge on that?
Yes, I get a lot of response. The best thing that this has happened, I mean, that since this has happened is that a lot of family members have been coming towards the group like, "What can I do?" You know, it actually increased a lot of our followers, this situation, and I'm glad that it's happened because it's like, "Okay, now that I have you here, let me educate you, let me show you that your voice matters." So it's
That's
really
right.
kind of giving them that incentive, like, "Look, you," I mean, it's giving them that, extra inspiration that your voice is more powerful than you think. And the only reason why they've gotten away with this for so long in prison reform as a whole is because we never really put our foot on their necks. We never
Yeah,
really have
yeah,
called them out on, the things that they've done because we've always felt defeated. It's designed the system is designed to make families feel defeated up front from the lawyer, from the whole process. And
yeah.
so
That's
you feel
right.
like there's nothing that you could do, and actually that's a lie. And so I tell people all the time, I don't take no for an answer. I don't care what is said to me. I'm just gonna shoot my shot in every avenue until I open up a door. And that's the main thing that I try to inspire them. I'm like, use your voice. You have authority. These people are in
Right.
their positions because of us, and family members do need to become more active. So I also try to explain that you can't have the mindset that they got a bed and 3 meals a day. Oh, no, baby, let me let you know what's really going on the inside.
Right, right, right.
Like, what their day-to-day lifestyle is really like. So bringing awareness to the general public is also needed because they just don't understand. Like you said, Virginia doesn't believe in rehabilitation.
No. And the reality is that this is the law. According to law is the sentence is the punishment. The punishment is not your imprisonment.
Thank
Your
you.
the sentence, once would you give me the sentence, that's my punishment. From that point on, everything beyond that point is to change me so
Mhm.
that when I return to
And it
society, because
stops there.
right,
It stops
but
at the punishment.
in their mind that the sentence is the punishment and your imprisonment is a reinforcement of the punishment, and your confinement is like a marriage vow, to death do you part. Oh,
Mhm.
you gonna die before you leave. You gonna die before you depart. But on a more personal, how is your husband doing in regard? Because and what was this situation? I know you don't want to make it a personal thing, but what was this situation in terms of him being affected by this particular bill and its
You know,
law?
he was, he was very first when he got the news that he was eligible, that was in April, it was like 2 days after our 4th anniversary, and he
Mm.
found out that he was eligible, so we were, like, really excited because I was pushing for the bill anyway, but I didn't know that he would be eligible, so we found
Right,
out, like, a year later that he was eligible, which happens to be this year, and I was like, "Oh, wow, so we're included," and so then in that moment, it became, like, a scary thing because I was like, "Oh, I hope they're right. I hope his counselor has the right information because sometimes these
right,
counselors just be saying anything, and so, and found out that it was true. And he was set to be released or be in the second wave, which would be between August and September. And even when I had to tell him, I remember that day where he called me on the 17th of June, and it was actually the same exact day in which the budget amendment was approved by the governor. And I remember he was in such a good mood, and in that moment I said, I just can't tell him right now.
right,
um,
right.
I
Mm.
didn't wanna I just it was just the mood he was
Yeah,
in, which is
yeah.
very rare, so, I was like, "I'm just gonna go with the mood that he's in." So, it wasn't until the following day where I had a face-to-face visit with him. At visitation, I expressed to him what happened, and he kinda just sat there for a minute in silence, like, almost like a disbelief. He kinda looked off a little bit, and he said, "Are you serious?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, what happened?" And, I had to break it down to him, what happened. He's like, "Man, it's that's not good. It's gonna be a lot of us." That's how he was just shaking his head. He was like, "It's just gonna be a lot of it." He had so many questions like that, like, "What about the letters?" I'm like, "Babe, they don't mean anything."
Right, right. Right, and that's the other part of this the prison industrial complex and mass incarceration. It's the new plantation. It's a new form of slavery. And as we know, slaves didn't have no rights to redress. Slaves didn't have no rights to uh, advocate on their behalf. Slaves had no rights whatsoever. And this is the same thing going on now when we find ourselves in situations like Virginia, because I recall my own personal experience when we had a case come out that affected, I was serving a life sentence, and we had and affected lifers. And the case came out in our favor. And when it came out in our favor, it means that all the lifers that was tried between 1960 and 1980 would be released or retried.
Mm,
The races in uh, Annapolis had got the judge to allow for reconsideration of a law of a case that was decided in our favor to reconsider it and reverse it. It took 8 years of appeals to get it to, to come around
mm,
to into 2015. I'm talking about like in 2000. I'm talking about 1980 something, 1998. It took all that time for it to work its way through the courts and for us to get out as a result of that. But Shari, you got the last word on this here. What do you want uh, people to do that's maybe not in Virginia, but that are supporters of any type of advocacy when it comes to abolishing the prison industrial complex and ending mass incarceration? What do you want people to do? And make sure you give your information on how you can be contacted, or how your group can be contacted, so we can support the efforts that's being made on behalf of the brothers and sisters in Virginia.
Honestly, really, the biggest thing, being in advocacy for going on 5 years, the biggest thing that I would want is more participation. We have so many people that were affected by this one particular bill, over 8,000, and as many as families are incarcerated in Virginia, there should be more participation from family members. And I just want them to understand how much their participation is needed because we really can do a lot of work together. And also removing the selfishness when it comes to advocacy. Some people only get involved because, oh, well, my loved one falls under this bill. That's all I care about. But as you can see, because we didn't care enough for one another, there were some people that were only
Yeah, that's right.
focused on certain things. And this was allowed to happen because there wasn't unity as a whole. We need each other. It doesn't matter what. Prison reform is prison reform. You can't be about one side and not be about the other. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of people see that now. And so I would want more unity, more conformity, more activeness, all that. Just get involved, really get involved. That's very important. Show up to these rallies, stop making excuses. Come out. You got a loved one that's incarcerated. Learn about the lifestyle that they're dealing with on the inside. Yes, they got in trouble, but they're greater than their worst mistake. And family is what helps them when they come home. And they need that. They need that support.
There you have it. Chari Baker, Rattling the Bars. The
Yeah.
real news about racist Virginia policies that are affecting over 8,000 men and women that were expected to be released. It was a
Mhm.
system they put in effect. It was a system that they passed. And when we played by the rules, they changed the rules at the 11th hour. And there's no way we can win. But we will win if we unite, as Shari said,
Yeah.
join forces, demand that they reverse this arbitrary, capricious, and racist act that's affecting hundreds of family members, and more importantly, support the efforts of Shari and the brothers and sisters that are out front trying to reverse the 13th Amendment as we know it in the form of racist Virginia prison policies. Thank
Mm.
you, Shari, for joining us, and we really appreciate you taking your time out to educate our viewers and our listeners. And we hope that at some point in time we can join you
Yeah.
in attending some of your activities down there in Virginia.
Yes, thank you so much. And for anyone listening, it's Fighting for Reform on Facebook, Fighting for FOR Reform. And you can find us there. You'll see the logo, the hands with the cuff, and you can join us on Facebook.
All right, there you have it. The real news, according to Chari Baker.